Have you ever been scrolling through real estate listings at 2 in the morning, looking at houses you can't afford, imagining what it would be like to own property someday? You know that weird thing we all do where we torture ourselves by looking at properties that might as well be on Mars because they're equally out of reach? Then you close the app, go back to paying your landlord's mortgage, and tell yourself that maybe someday, somehow, you'll figure out how to buy real estate. Here's what nobody tells you about that someday. There's a specific dollar amount that transforms you from someone who dreams about owning property to someone who actually buys property. And that number isn't $1 million. It's not even 100,000. It's $50,000. My name is Rob, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, real estate, and the psychological barriers that keep people renting forever when they could be building wealth through property ownership. If you've ever wondered what it actually takes to break into real estate, or why some people seem to magically transition from renter to property owner while others stay stuck, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you want to understand the real estate game that most people never figure out. Now, before we dive into why $50,000 is so powerful, let me paint you a picture of what life looks like without it. You're paying rent every month. Let's say $800, maybe $2,200 depending on where you live. That's money that disappears forever, building absolutely zero wealth for you while making your landlord richer. You know this. Everyone knows this. But what are you supposed to do about it? You've been told you need a down payment to buy property, but the actual amount feels abstract and impossible. 20% down on a $300,000 house is $60,000. Where exactly are you supposed to get $60,000? So you keep renting, you keep making your landlord's mortgage payment, you keep watching property values go up while you're stuck on the sidelines. And the worst part, you start to internalize this. You start thinking of yourself as someone who rents, not someone who owns. You become comfortable with the identity of being a renter, even though that identity is costing you thousands of dollars every single month and preventing you from building any real wealth. But here's where things get really interesting. There's a specific psychological shift that happens when you accumulate $50,000 in savings, and it has almost nothing to do with the actual money. The first thing that changes is how you see yourself in relation to real estate. When you have zero savings or even $10,000 or $20,000 saved up, real estate feels like something other people do. Rich people, successful people, people who have their lives figured out. Not you, but when you hit $50,000, something switches in your brain. Suddenly, you're not just a renter anymore. You're someone who could buy property. Not someday, not eventually, now, today, if you wanted to. That psychological shift is massive because it changes everything about how you interact with the world. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of the housing market and start seeing yourself as a participant in it. You're no longer locked out. You have a key, you might not use it immediately, but knowing you have it changes how you think and act. The second thing that changes, and this is huge, is your relationship with landlords. When you're broke and renting, your landlord has all the power. They can raise your rent, they can refuse to fix things, they can decide not to renew your lease. You're basically at their mercy because what are you going to do? Move to another rental and deal with another landlord. But when you have $50,000 saved, that power dynamic shifts. Your landlord is no longer your only option. You could buy a property. You could stop making them rich and start building your own wealth. Suddenly, that rent increase they're proposing doesn't just annoy you, it motivates you. Every dollar they try to squeeze out of you is a dollar that could be going toward your own mortgage instead. This changes how you negotiate. It changes how much garbage you're willing to tolerate. Most importantly, it changes your timeline. You're not going to be renting forever, and you know it. Your landlord is now temporary, not permanent. Here's something fascinating that happens when you cross the $50,000 threshold. You start seeing properties completely differently. When you're broke, you look at houses the way you look at Ferraris. Nice to look at, fun to imagine owning, but ultimately not relevant to your actual life. They're in the category of things other people have. But when you have real estate buying power, properties stop being dreams and start being opportunities. You drive past a house with a for sale sign, and instead of thinking, that's nice, you start thinking, I wonder what that's listed at. What would the mortgage payment be? Could I afford that? You scroll through real estate listings not to torture yourself, but to actually evaluate options. You start noticing details that never mattered before. What school district is it in? What are the property taxes? How much would insurance cost? What's the rent potential if you wanted to house hack it? This shift from passive dreaming to active analysis is critical because it means you're developing the investor mindset before you even buy your first property. You're training your brain to evaluate real estate as an investment, not just as a place to live. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Once you start thinking like this, you can't stop. You become that person who's always checking property values, always aware of what things are selling for, always calculating potential returns. Your friends might find it annoying, but you're building wealth while they're still complaining about their landlords. There's also a confidence factor that's hard to quantify but impossible to ignore. When you know you have $50,000 in the bank, you carry yourself differently in real estate situations. You tour properties not as someone hoping to maybe someday afford something, but as someone who could make an offer today. Real estate agents treat you differently when they know you're serious. Sellers take you seriously. You're not wasting anyone's time. You're a real buyer with real resources. This confidence affects your decision making in subtle but powerful ways. You're more likely to negotiate aggressively because you're not desperate. You're more willing to walk away from bad deals because you know other opportunities will come. You can wait for the right property instead of jumping at the first thing that seems barely affordable. Desperation makes people make terrible real estate decisions. Confidence, backed by actual resources, makes people make smart real estate decisions. Now let's talk about why specifically $50,000 is the magic number, because it's not arbitrary. There's actual real estate math behind this. In most markets, $50,000 gives you the buying power to acquire property worth $250,000 to $300,000 with a conventional 20% down payment. Why does 20% down matter? Because it lets you avoid PMI, which is private mortgage insurance that costs hundreds of dollars per month and builds zero equity. It also gets you better interest rates. It makes your offers more attractive to sellers. It gives you instant equity in the property. A 20% down payment is the difference between buying real estate like a professional and buying it like someone who's desperate and overleveraged. But here's what makes $50,000 really powerful. It's not just enough for one down payment. It's enough for a down payment and still have money left over for closing costs, initial repairs, and maintaining an emergency fund. This is critical because buying property with literally every dollar you have is a recipe for disaster. You need reserves. You need cushion. You need to be able to handle the inevitable expenses that come with property ownership. When you have $50,000, you can put down $40,000 on a property and still have $10,000 left over. That's not an amazing emergency fund, but it's enough to handle the immediate costs of home ownership without panicking. You can cover closing costs without draining your account. You can handle a broken water heater or a roof leak without going into debt. You're not just buying property, you're buying property sustainably, which is what separates successful real estate investors from people who buy one property and then immediately struggle with it. There's also something psychological about having 5 figures available. $10,000 feels like a lot of money, but it doesn't feel like real estate money. $30,000 feels substantial, but it still feels like you're not quite there yet. $50,000 crosses a threshold in your brain where you stop thinking, maybe I could buy property someday, and start thinking, I can buy property now. That mental shift changes everything about how you approach real estate opportunities. Let's talk about something that happens when you cross into real estate ownership that nobody really prepares you for. Your entire social dynamic changes. When you're a renter, your conversations with other renters are basically complaint sessions about landlords, rent increases, maintenance issues, how expensive everything is getting. It's a shared misery that bonds people together. But when you become a property owner, those conversations become irrelevant to you. You're not dealing with a landlord anymore. You're not worried about rent increases. You're in a completely different game now. Your conversations shift to things like property values, mortgage rates, tax implications, appreciation potential. You start talking to other property owners about rental income, property management, market trends. You're speaking a different language than you were 6 months ago. Some of your renter friends might get annoyed with you. Oh, great. Now Rob won't shut up about property taxes and equity. But you know what? Those friends are still making their landlord rich while you're building wealth. Who's really winning here? There's also a class element to this that people don't like to talk about, but is absolutely real. In our society, property ownership is one of the clear dividing lines between different economic classes. Renters are generally seen as less established, less stable, less successful than property owners. It's not fair, it's not always accurate, but it's how the world works. When you transition from renter to owner, you're crossing that class boundary in a very visible way. People treat you differently, banks treat you differently, you get access to financial products and opportunities that weren't available when you were just a renter. You can get home equity lines of credit, you can use your property as collateral for business loans. You have an asset that grows in value while you sleep. This isn't just about feeling successful or impressing people, it's about access to the tools that wealthy people use to build more wealth. Property ownership is the entry ticket to that game. Here's something interesting about human psychology that plays out in real estate. When you're a renter, you have built-in excuses for why you haven't bought property yet. The down payment is too high, the market is too expensive, interest rates are too high, you're not ready yet, you need to save more. These excuses are comfortable because they absolve you of responsibility. It's not your fault you're renting. The system is rigged against you. But when you have $50,000 in the bank, those excuses evaporate. You can't claim you don't have a down payment. You can't say you're not ready financially. The only thing standing between you and property ownership at that point is your willingness to act. This terrifies some people. They'd rather stay comfortable in their excuses than face the reality that they could buy property but are choosing not to. So they find new excuses. The market is at the top. Now's not the right time. They want to save more. They're waiting for rates to drop. These people will still be making excuses 10 years from now while property values have doubled and they're still renting. Here's where the real magic happens with that first property purchase, and this is what separates people who build real wealth from people who own one house and call it a day. That first property creates momentum for the second property, and the second creates momentum for the third. It's a compound effect that most people never experience because they never make that first move. Let me explain how this works. You buy your first property with that $50,000. Let's say you put down $45,000 on a $225,000 house, keep $5,000 for emergencies, you live in it for 2 years. In those 2 years, several things happen. First, you're building equity through your mortgage payments. Every month, a portion of your payment goes toward principal, increasing your ownership stake. Second, the property is likely appreciating. Even modest appreciation of 3% per year means your $225,000 property is now worth about $238,000. Third, you're saving money because you're not paying rent anymore. Maybe your mortgage payment is similar to what you were paying in rent, but the key difference is you're building equity instead of making your landlord rich. After 2 years, you've built maybe $15,000 in equity through payments plus $13,000 in appreciation. That's $28,000 in wealth you didn't have before. Now here's where it gets interesting. You can refinance and pull some of that equity out. Or you can keep that property, rent it out, and use the rental income to qualify for a second mortgage. Or you can sell it, take your gains, and buy a more expensive property. The point is that first property created options that didn't exist before. It gave you leverage in both the financial sense and the strategic sense. People who understand this don't stop at one property. They use their first property as a springboard to acquire a second, then a third, then more. Each property builds equity, each property appreciates, each property creates more opportunities. Within 10 years, they might own 4 or 5 properties worth over $1 million combined. Meanwhile, their friends who never made that first purchase are still renting, still complaining, still waiting for the perfect time that will never come. The compound effect of real estate ownership is one of the most powerful wealth-building tools available to regular people, but you have to make that first move to access it. Here's something that's really important to understand. That $50,000 doesn't just buy you property, it buys you credibility in the real estate market. When you make an offer with 20% down, sellers and their agents know you're serious. They know you have the resources to close. They know you're not some tire kicker who's going to waste everyone's time with financing that falls through. In competitive markets, this credibility can be the difference between getting your offer accepted and losing out to another buyer. Sellers want to work with buyers who can close smoothly and quickly. When you have substantial cash for a down payment, you're that buyer. You can close in 30 days. You can waive certain contingencies if needed. You have options that buyers with 3% down don't have. This is power, and power in real estate translates directly into better deals and more opportunities. Let's address something that's probably bothering some people watching this. $50,000 is an insane amount of money to save. How is anyone supposed to do that? And you're right, it's a lot of money. But here's the thing, it's not impossible and people do it every single day. The difference between people who save $50,000 and people who don't isn't usually income. It's intentionality and time horizon. The median household income in the US is around $75,000. That's about $6,150 per month gross, or maybe $4,500 after taxes. If you can save $1,000 per month, you'll have $50,000 in about 4 years. That's it, 4 years. Is it easy? No. Does it require sacrifice? Absolutely. You'll need to cut back on eating out, skip some vacations, drive an older car, say no to expensive hobbies. But is it possible for most people earning median income or higher? Yes. The question isn't, can I save $50,000? The question is, am I willing to do what it takes to save $50,000? Most people aren't willing. They'd rather spend money on things that make them feel successful in the short term than delay gratification for actual long-term success. They want the new car, the nice apartment, the regular restaurant meals, the weekend trips. And that's fine, that's their choice. But they don't get to complain about not being able to afford property when they're making that choice every single day. Here's the brutal truth. Saving $50,000 requires becoming a different type of person. You can't save that much while maintaining the spending habits that kept you broke. You need to develop discipline, delayed gratification, long-term thinking. You need to stop caring what other people think about your lifestyle. You need to be okay with driving a 10-year-old car while your friends lease new ones. You need to be okay with a modest apartment while your coworkers rent luxury places. This identity shift is uncomfortable, which is why most people never make it. They'd rather maintain their current identity and complain about the results than change their identity and change their results. But here's what makes it worth it. The person you become while saving $50,000 is someone who can build serious wealth. The discipline, the long-term thinking, the ability to delay gratification, these traits don't disappear once you hit your savings goal. They compound, they make your second $50,000 easier to save. They make your investment decisions better. They make you someone who builds wealth systematically instead of someone who gets lucky once and blows it. The money is important, but the person you become while saving the money is even more valuable. Now let's talk about something that most personal finance advice completely misses. The psychological difference between $49,000 and $50,000 is massive, even though it's literally just $1,000. Why? Because round numbers have psychological power. When you have $49,000, you're almost there. When you have $50,000, you've arrived. Your brain treats these two amounts completely differently, even though mathematically they're nearly identical. This is why specific milestones matter so much in wealth building. $10,000 feels different than $9,500. $100,000 feels different than $95,000. And $50,000 feels different than $48,000. That last push to hit the round number is emotionally significant in a way that's hard to explain, but everyone understands when they experience it. When you hit $50,000 and you've crossed into five-figure savings territory in a meaningful way, you're not broke, you're not scraping by, you have real resources, you have options, you have power. This psychological shift manifests in very practical ways. You start taking yourself more seriously as an investor. You start making bolder moves, you start thinking bigger. Maybe you've been planning to buy a small condo. Now you're looking at single-family houses that could be rentals someday. Maybe you were thinking about staying local. Now you're considering markets in other states where your $50,000 goes further. The amount of money unlocks possibilities, but the psychological shift unlocks ambition. Here's something else that changes when you have $50,000 saved. You stop being impressed by people who look successful and start being impressed by people who are actually building wealth. You realize that your coworker with the new BMW is probably making car payments that would make your eyes water. You notice that your friend in the luxury apartment is probably spending 50% of their income on rent. You understand that the people posting vacation photos every month probably have credit card debt funding their lifestyle. Meanwhile, you're sitting on $50,000 that nobody knows about because you don't need to broadcast it. You know you're winning the long game, and that knowledge is more satisfying than any Instagram worthy purchase could ever be. The social dynamics shift even further once you actually buy property. Suddenly, you're the person giving advice instead of asking for it. Your younger siblings want to know how you did it. Your friends who are still renting want tips. You become the example of what's possible, which can be uncomfortable but is also incredibly validating. You prove to yourself and everyone else that you could do something most people only talk about. That confidence extends into other areas of your life. You start believing you can accomplish other difficult things because you've already accomplished this difficult thing. The real estate purchase becomes evidence that you're capable of more than you thought. Let's talk about the compound effect of that first property purchase one more time because this is really the ultimate payoff. You buy your first property with your $50,000. 2 years later, you've built equity. You buy a second property, maybe using the equity from the first as leverage. 2 years after that, you buy a third. In less than a decade, you could own 4 or 5 properties. Each property is appreciating, each property is building equity, each property potentially generates rental income. The wealth building accelerates in ways that are hard to believe until you see it happen. I know people who bought their first property at age 30 with about $50,000 down. By age 40, they owned 6 properties worth over $2 million combined. They didn't inherit money. They didn't get lucky in crypto. They just made that first purchase and then kept going. Meanwhile, their friends who waited for the perfect time, who stayed comfortable renting, who kept making excuses, those friends are still renting and wondering why they can't get ahead financially. The difference wasn't intelligence or luck. It was willingness to act when they had the resources to do so. Here's the brutal reality about real estate and wealth building. The best time to buy property was 10 years ago. The second best time is now. Prices will probably be higher next year than they are today. Interest rates might go up or down, but property values trend upward over time. Every year you wait is a year of appreciation you're missing. Every month you pay rent is a month you're building someone else's wealth instead of your own. But here's the good news. If you have $50,000 or are close to it, you have the power to change your trajectory right now. Not someday, not when conditions are perfect, now. You can stop being a renter and become an owner. You can stop complaining about landlords and become someone who builds wealth through real estate. You can stop making excuses and start making offers. The question is, are you going to do it, or are you going to wait another 5 years and wish you had started today? So there you have it. $50,000 isn't just a number in your savings account. It's the key that unlocks real estate opportunities most people only dream about. It's the amount that transforms you from someone who hopes to own property someday to someone who can actually buy property today. It changes how you see yourself, how you see real estate, and how you interact with the world. If you're sitting at $15,000 or $25,000 right now, keep going. You're closer than you think, and the person you're becoming, while saving that money is more valuable than the money itself. If you're at $50,000 or past it and haven't bought property yet, what are you waiting for? Every month you delay is another month of rent payments that build zero wealth for you. The market is never going to be perfect. Interest rates are never going to be exactly what you want. There's never going to be a flashing neon sign saying buy now. You have to make the decision yourself. Stop making excuses. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. Stop being comfortable in your renter identity. Take that $50,000 and turn it into the first piece of real wealth you've ever built. Your future self, probably living in the second or third property you bought after learning the game with your first one, will thank you for finally making the move that changed everything.